when you pay attention to how you do what you do, you affect the way you think and the way you feel. There are 4 components to every action: thinking, sensing, moving, and feeling, emotion. And that all 4 of those things are going on all at the same time. But we're not aware of all of that.
Welcome to the Mindfulness in Motion podcast, the show that helps you move beyond the checklist of life and into a world of joy and meaning and discovery. I'm your host, Cori, and I am thrilled to have you, our listener, here with us today. And I'm thrilled to have Lavinia with us today. She's an internationally renowned movement teacher, facilitator, and we're going to talk about how mindful movement can transform the body, the mind, and the emotions. Whether you've come to overcome a physical or mental limitations, improve your posture, or deepen your emotional awareness, this conversation is for you. Let's dive in. Welcome, Lavinia.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Well, I'm going to dive right in. So tell us about the Feldenkrais, because this is an area that I have known lightly about for many years, because it's in the aquatics industry too. So I'd love to hear more about it and tell our audience what it is and why it would come up in a conversation about mindfulness in motion.
Well, because it is mindfulness in motion, if you really just took the essence of the Feldenkrais method. So first, let me tell you about the name, because that's what stops people a lot of times. They're like, I've heard people say, well, we don't do religious movements because they put a T at the end of it. Or I even one time had somebody call me and say that they were interested in this Feldenkrais. So, there's so many different complications just when you have a complicated name. And I joke around sometimes and say, there was a time where nobody knew what Pilates was, and they called it the pilot's method. People would call when I had a studio and say, I want to know about this pilot's method. Words are so, it takes a while for them to enter the vocabulary of the entire planet. So Feldenkrais, is, just like Pilates, is named after a person. His name was Moshe Feldenkrais, and he was a martial artist, an engineer, and a neuroscientist. So he kind of brought together this idea of, structure, function, and how that is kind of influencing the entire being of oneself. I was going to say body, but we have a tendency in our culture to say that this is my mind and this is my body. And he wanted us to look at the whole. So he actually developed the method because he, being an athlete, had injured himself. So anybody who's been through injury benefits from the Feldenkrais method, and was told he would never really be able to walk again. This is way before they had knee surgery. And he used his curiosity, his research, and his own practice to kind of relearn walking. And in the process, realized that when you pay attention to how you do what you do, you affect the way you think and the way you feel. So that's why, for me, when we say mindful movement, there's a tendency to think that that means I think about my movement. But mindful movement is having a kind of global awareness of how you are. One of the brilliant things he said was that there are 4 components to every action: thinking, sensing, moving, and feeling, emotion. And he said that all 4 of those things are going on all at the same time. But we're not aware of all of that because it's, life is too fast. So sometimes I tune into my emotions. Sometimes I tune into my thinking. If I had to think about my movement all the time, I'd never get out of the driveway. I'd never even be able to make a cup of coffee because I'd be going, and now I put in grinds, right? It's wonderful to be that mindful, but none of us has the time. So we're programmed in our bodies to be able to improve our habitual movement. And then at the same time, we can add these layers of intelligence, these layers of clarity, and seeing where our emotions are. I love that you're, applying this to swimming, because when I can have an awareness of my emotional state while I'm swimming, I can actually process things as I'm going through the lapse, or, seeing where I'm getting anxious about performance, or seeing where I don't have enough breath. All of these different things can improve through the process of Feldenkrais. So the Feldenkrais method uses, really cool, slow, gentle movements, often done lying down on the floor, to help you come back to a clarity of how you do things. He said that it's not the process of trying to make something happen. It's about the attention that you pay to what you're doing that allows the brain to make the choices for you. So I've worked with swimmers, on and off in different ways, lots of times, and they always talk about how the movements done on the floor translate right to the pool. Because, when you're swimming, you're also horizontal a lot of times. So you're having a different relationship to gravity. You're certainly having a different relationship to the parts that move, but it's still a very useful transitional principle using these movements.
Nice. So interesting. That was great. I really appreciate you starting with the words and understanding the words, and then taking us all the way through his story. And even just that part of, at a time when we didn't have knee surgery, I have elders in my life who remind me of these things when they get so excited to be able to have something like knee surgery, because they remember days when people just sat in chairs. And I think, oh my gosh, at the age that I know people who have knee surgery, today it's unfathomable to me to think about being immobile in your 60s, maybe, or, even mid 50s, people have those knee surgeries. So it's amazing that that kind of technology has changed so much. Now, I want to come back to another point you made. You said that we think of mindfulness of, like, what you gave the example of the coffee pot. Now I'm moving my hand like this. So now I'm doing like this. So that's one side of it, that we don't have the time to be that kind of mindful all the time. But yet it sounds like this is a part of the practice, though, is this laying on the floor and being that slow. How does, when you spend time being very mindful in that kind of way, how does it translate into times where you don't want to be that mindful all the time, because it's just not efficient for life?
It's a brilliant question. So when I take the time in an intentional situation, so let's just say that I'm doing a lesson that's exploring the movement of the shoulder joint, right? And I'm taking the time to sense that when I raise my shoulder, oh, there's a little glitch there. I feel that glitch. And then I pause, I wait, I breathe, maybe I let it come back down again, and I try another way of moving it. And slowly, as I'm doing these different movements that bring awareness to how the shoulder blade slides, what I'm feeling in the pectoral area and in my upper ribs as I move my shoulder forward, as the brain has the time to organize and realize, oh, part of the reason so much tension in my neck is because of my holding in the shoulder, or the brain. It's the intelligence of my brain having the time to process what we call parasitic habits. In other words, habits that served us at a certain point in our life, but now are actually eating our energy, interfering with our ability to do things. And yet we can't see it because it's a habit. And that's just the way I live my life. So then I've worked and explored just this one little part of my shoulder. And then as I go into my life and I suddenly reach for something and realize, oh, I'm not doing that anymore. It's not because I had to think about relaxing my shoulder, but because the sensory cortex, the motor cortex, got new information, right? So what we're trying to do when we are lying on the floor is gather data. I'm gathering new information, creating new neural connections. I don't want to geek out too much on all of that. But the fact is that when I'm doing that, the brain is busy going, aha, 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 aha. Not my thinking word brain, but the whole sort of sensory apparatus. And then what it does is it integrates that new information so that the next time that I try to do the crawl, or the next time I reach for something, the system goes, hey, how about doing it this way? So that I'm developing more functional habits. So if we go back to the coffee for a moment, instead of having to think about how I reach for the coffee pot, now my whole nervous system is allowing me to kind of organize everything as I put those grinds in the grinder. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It makes sense to me in this, of course, we all put it into our own context. But I think about when we first bring people to the pool, like one of the ways that I teach is I teach online. And I say, when you go to the pool, you want to just walk onto the pool deck. And that's it. Because you're going to smell the smells, right? You're going to have a body reaction. This is the place that we have to start making changes and adjustments to feeling, oh my gosh, how the body just tensed up merely by hearing the sounds and smelling the smells and feeling the wet tiles under your feet, all this information that's coming in that has had emotional and physical connection that you've built up because it served, just like you said. I always love this idea of remembering that it comes from a place that served you. At one time, it served you. If you had, again, in the context of swimming, if you had a negative experience in swimming, you were a kid and somebody threw you in the water or something, it makes sense for you to be tense and to have this physical and emotional hold when you walk out onto a pool deck. And when we just slow down and we allow that to move through, so we're in a different state, we're building a new emotional and physical habit. So that's how I was seeing it come through.
Yeah, exactly. And the idea of baby steps, tiny steps, right? So when someone comes to me, I work with a lot of older people, for example, who can't get down to the floor or can't get back up off the floor, right? We don't start with, okay, drag yourself over to the easy chair and pull yourself up. Come on, you could do it. We start with very small ideas of how to feel more safe. You start in a chair, you shift your weight, you feel how the weight moves under your feet. You feel what it's like to, move from side to side so that more and more information comes into your movement vocabulary. So you have more access to things. So it's the same thing with fear. And, I wrote a whole book on fear. Fear, when we're afraid of something because of a trauma, and for some people, having swum is a traumatic experience, or having been thrown in the water. I speak from experience. The idea of taking baby steps, of small things, and of monitoring yourself in the process, seeing when the thought appears, seeing when the breath is interrupted, seeing when the kind of trauma reflex starts to come into the body, and having resources. It's ultimately about having resources for yourself to stay safe.
So good. Yes, safe. That is a huge thing. We have this idea that I see this over and over again, and maybe you do too, of people thinking, well, when I can do the thing, this big leap ahead of time, when I can jump up off the floor, then I'll be safe from, hip fractures or falls. And we see this really the end product as the place of safety. But what I hear you saying, and what we work with folks on too, is the safety has to be the essential key at the beginning. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, because, Feldenkrais, he has such great sayings, and there were two things that he said. One was that learning should be a pleasurable experience. And if you're not having...
What?
I know. And if
that's supposed to be torture and pushing and hard.
If you're not having fun, you're not learning. So if you're going to learn how to swim and you're not having fun, you might learn how to paddle, but you're never actually going to swim well because you've got this thing going on, right? That makes it not fun. So the process has to be in some way a pleasurable, safe experience. The other thing that he always used to say, which is like my mantra, is if you know what you're doing, you can do what you want. If you know what you're doing, you can do what you want. So if you don't know that you're holding your breath, or that you're tensing in your neck, or that you're gripping in your hip flexors, if you don't know that, you can't move forward. You have to have, and knowing is, again, not an intellectual process. It's a sensory experience of oneself. It's a clarity of your proprioceptive abilities, right? A clarity of my own image of myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, that last statement speaks so well to, again, I'll go back to that coffee example, right? Is there are times, so this, and I think that struck me because one of my mindfulness and motion routines that I do is in the morning when I make my hot water for my tea. I press the button on the kettle, but I do it with this very slow intention, and I pause and I breathe and I tune into my sense of hearing. When I hear the sound start in the kettle, that becomes my trigger to like, okay, I can now move into another part. So I'm not having this intense mindfulness and motion all of the time, but I'm inserting it in little ways so that other times when I need it, I'm better. I know that I'm much better at calling upon this slowing down, tuning into the sensory information. Just had a student this week who was telling me about, as she's doing her mindfulness and motion practices, that she said, I lost my purse. And usually I'd like freak out and run around and have this terrible pit in my stomach that I lost my purse. I can't believe I did it again in beat up fashion. And she said, since I've been practicing this, gosh, I got a little upset with myself. Oh, dang it. But then she said she was just calm about going through the process of finding the purse and found the purse without a bunch of drama. So this practicing in small places so that you're better at it later. I love this.
I'm laughing to myself because, I teach all this stuff. And as you were talking, I was thinking, gosh, if I could only remember that when I can't find my phone.
Yeah. Because that happens to us all the time. Yeah. And that phone, it feels so emotionally charged because we have so much of our life in our phone, or in her case, in her purse. But yet these little things that are so powerful in our lives.
Right.
But it's not useful for us to be in a huge upset to be able to find it.
Right. It is not useful. Good point.
Yeah, it's not useful. But now, okay, the other area I'm interested in hearing from you about. So you've worked in theater and dance and yoga. Tell me more. And this is my own personal thing too. Anybody who's followed me for a long time knows I have craved for a long, long time to find a dance teacher who teaches dance the way I teach swimming. Because what I find is most dance classes, like most swimming classes, they're putting the cart before the horse. They're like not taking safety into account, that we're going to teach you all the steps and throw the music at you and then make it more complex while your nervous system is freaking out. At least mine does anyways. It's like swimming classes that start with front crawl when you don't know how to put your face in the water. So tell me about your experience of bringing mindfulness in motion in whatever ways that you've done it into dance or martial arts, these other technical areas, how you bring these together.
So it's been a while since I've actually worked with dancers and mimes from this perspective, but there were a couple of different ways that I did. And when I work with, again, you're asking two different questions in a way. One is how someone can improve their dancing through using movement. Another is how do you teach dance in a more mindful way? So two kind of separate things. So when I have worked with dancers or any physical performer one-on-one, we always start with, well, what is it you'd like to do better? What is it that you're wanting to improve? What is it that you're looking at that's holding you back? So, if you give an example, for example, of, say, being able to kick higher, so the harder you try, the worse it's going to get, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
I can feel my handspring yelling at me already.
But then you start to explore what happens if I, for example, do some movements involving greater flexion of the spine. What happens if I kick with the leg really bent in flexion? What happens if I completely let go of doing it well and do it horribly, which is a strategy we do a lot in teaching musicians, dancers, swimmers. Just do it as badly as you possibly can. Don't worry about trying, or use another part of yourself with, again, with dancers, instead of hold yourself erect, pull in the belly, and now kick as high as you can. It's like, just let your whole body go and let it kick and see what goes with it, in order to allow some of the tension and allow the system to make some other choices. And people inevitably find that suddenly their grand battement has, gone through the roof. So, and it's the same with musicians. Now, when I have taught in groups, I don't know, you do group classes as well as,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? So when I'm teaching in groups, then usually we're working with a specific technique, right? And so then sometimes I will literally have the class lie down and do what we call an awareness through movement lesson. So, Feldenkrais created about 1,000 different sequences, 45-minute sequences of movement that he called awareness through movement lessons. And then, of course, other people have gone on and expanded on that and integrated it in different ways. So it's an almost limitless exploration of the possibilities of human movement. So I would take a lesson that maybe is relevant to what they're trying to do. Say they want to improve their balance in order to pirouette. Or, so we would work with lessons that involve rotation, that involve improving peripheral vision, that involve finding strength in the grounding of the pelvis, and, have them say, do the series of turns across the room, lie down on the floor, do a full awareness through movement lesson, and then get up and try the movement again and see how it has improved. So that's one way that I've worked. Another way that I've worked a lot with performers is just using greater awareness of self to increase confidence, to reduce fear, to get rid of stage fright, to be able to be present in the moment while performing, because you have access to all your parts. You know where you are in space, you know who you are. So therefore, you can respond to any situation that's happening on stage. The ability to be spontaneous. In fact, one of Feldenkrais's books, he titled it The Potent Self, A Guide to Spontaneity. The ability to be able to respond instead of react, the really important things for any performer. When I've worked with martial artists, that's a completely different situation, because Feldenkrais was a martial artist. So what he did was, a lot of his movement lessons were like slowed down, broken down components of judo, rolling, falling, all this stuff. So, I could go into any martial arts studio and teach one of these awareness through movement lessons, and everybody would have a ball, because then they would throw themselves around and not hurt themselves.
Oh.
And with yoga, it's been really interesting, because the other thing that a lot of people didn't realize is that one of the many movement things that Feldenkrais explored was yoga. So again, out of that 1,000 series of lessons, there are many lessons that are related to or lead to exact asanas, exact yoga postures. And so going in and teaching a group of yoga students how to better stand on their head, how to get their legs over their head without the stress of actually having to do it. It is so empowering, to, instead of, okay, and now we're going to do this asana, and now we're going to do that asana. We spend the entire 45 minutes on one part of one pose. It's so rich. It's so fun.
Nice. I love it. I'm hearing there's these levels of being curious. There's these levels of getting away from the exactitude, the perfectionism, the work to performance, to allow the brain to be more creative instead of just so hyper focused on the one thing, to be able to open up and explore. And this slowing down, being able to slow down and be curious into the body.
Right. One of my equations is less movement plus more attention yields greater results.
Yes. I would so agree with that. That's where I see over and over again in the water when working with students, How do you help people? Because the other thing that was coming up for me that I see with our kinds of clients, be it people who are coming in and working on their mental fitness or their physical, is the desire to get there quickly. How do you help people with that piece of it?
So you used one of the key words, and that's curiosity, right? If a person suddenly becomes really curious, really interested in, I never noticed that. What do you mean the balls of my feet are supposed to push off? So where suddenly they're like, whoa, who knew that I could reach with my ribs? That then they become curious and they want to slow down instead of rushing to the result. So that's certainly one strategy. And the other strategy that we use, which is a strategy in learning, is introduction of novelty, right? If you keep on, we all know repetition is where learning takes place, but it has to be repetition with novelty. If you just keep doing the same thing the same way, you're going to get the same result. But if I introduce a different way of doing it, a different angle to look at it from, a different way of coming to the same goal, then that novelty is where the dopamine comes in, where the sense of reward comes in, where the aha moment appears in people. I love when I'm doing something like learning how to roll up to sitting, and there's someone that no matter what they do, they just keep hitting that obstacle, and then all of a sudden everything organizes and they sit up, and there's always this that moment of and and when I'm in a group class, a lot of times the people all go, yeah, she did it. But it's not that. For me, it's not the fact that they succeeded at rolling up. For me, it's that moment of them realizing that they have this potential, they have this power in them. That is the cool part, right? The accomplishment is almost anticlimactic in some ways. It's the feeling of realizing that I had this in me all along.
Yes. Oh, so good. It makes me think of one of my students, my online students, with jumping into the deep end, that she said, I thought it was going to be this huge climatic moment, but she had done such amazing preparatory work that by the time she actually got to it, it was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, that's exactly what I expected. And yeah, it was easy, and it was about that process over time.
And the beauty of your work and the Feldenkrais method or any mindful movement approach is that as I start to see my own inner obstacles to swimming or to getting up or whatever, I'm also starting to see how I can approach other aspects of my life, how I get in my own way in relationships, or how I sabotage myself when I'm trying to move ahead with a career move. I see that I do the same thing, right? That saying that all the coaches say, how you do one thing is how you do everything, right? So when I master jumping into the deep end and feeling like it's no big deal, then starting that new business doesn't seem like a big deal either. Right? That's the beauty of this, is that when I am functionally integrated, which is one of the terms that Moshe used, I am able to do what I want.
Absolutely.
And I'm clear about what I want too.
Absolutely. Yes. That is like the epitome of why we have these conversations, why I'm so interested in this idea of mindfulness in motion. It's great if you can dance or roll up from the floor, but it is about how it integrates with your whole life, that these things, when we train our systems in new ways and be curious with our body and our minds in new ways, it goes all over the place into our relationships and work, and that, as you touched upon, the self-confidence. Love it. So tell us a little bit about, you're currently, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the director of a movement center in Asheville?
Well, yeah, it's called Asheville Movement Center.
Great. So what is a movement center?
Well, I just gave it that name, 23 years ago when I moved to Asheville. When I lived in New Jersey, I had a movement center as well. It was part of an alternative wellness practice. And so we had all kinds of different classes going on there. In Asheville, I teach Feldenkrais. And that's all that's going on at the actual movement center.
Okay.
So I have classes there. I see people privately there. I use the movement center for gatherings of things. For example, next week, I think I have like a group of women coming in from the local Democratic precinct coming in for a workshop. It's going to be interesting, right? Because they've got another level of stress right now in their life. So they come to the movement center. We have mats there. We have classes. That's basically what happens there. And then, I do a lot of teaching online. So I use that studio as my studio space for when I'm teaching online.
Tell us more about that, because that would be how our listeners would probably get in touch with you.
So as you probably noticed, I have a pretty elaborate website with all kinds of information on everything from falling to the emotions. And I have lots of classes available that are audio recordings. One of the interesting things about the Feldenkrais method is that, unique in its own way, is that when you're learning the lessons, there's no visual model to imitate. When you're doing an awareness through movement lesson, you're following the audio instructions, which are designed and intended to be as clear as possible so that you don't feel lost. But you do not have to perform in a certain way. The idea is that when I have a visual model to imitate, I'm already judging myself. I'm already comparing myself to someone else or some other ideal instead of listening to my own integrity. So the lessons that I have are audio. I do have some video workshops online, but in those videos, it's just me talking and giving the audio lesson and responding to the groups. So again, I try not to demonstrate. I demonstrate a little bit, but I try not to demonstrate because I feel that takes away from the agency that we're trying to find in our own work. So I have lots of single lessons that I have made super cheap because I believe that the entire world should be doing those lessons and anyone can download them cheap. I have workshops that are there. I also have a series of workshops that I've done for a company called the Shift Network. Some people know the Shift Network. And those are all courses that I've taught in the past. And those all do have a live model demonstrating the lessons because that's how that company feels it's important for people to have a visual reference. So if people want something like that, they can sign up for those courses, which are, of course, much more expensive because it's through the Shift Network. I also teach online. Even when I'm at the Asheville Movement Center, during COVID, of course, there was nothing going on at the Asheville Movement Center. And so I was teaching exclusively online. And because of that, developed a group of people who don't live in Asheville. So now I do hybrid classes at the studio where I have people in person and then there's people on my computer. And then I also teach an exclusively online class, generally on Thursdays, 4 weeks on, 2 weeks off. That's always got a theme and a series that's involved. Like right now, we're in the middle of a series on the nervous system. So, and those are, you can come in person or you can just sign up and get the replay. It's, everybody's different. And that's people from all over the world coming in. It's really a kind of a cool group.
That's amazing. So
yeah.
fun.
And then I have some upcoming things also as well, but I don't want to go on and on and on.
Sure. Yeah. What I really enjoyed hearing about and identified with is this piece of, it's going back to this idea of the curiosity, but you're leading people into themselves and attain their own agency. And when we talk about safety, this is a really big piece of it. And that I think a lot of people are disconnected from finding our own safety within our own agency. So that's hugely powerful to be able to have a practice that it isn't about chasing what somebody else does, but it's about bringing ourselves in a loving, kind, gentle way to develop and enhance our own agency. So I really appreciate that you have that practice for people. When you talk about the Democrats who are coming in and the stress out in the world, right? But we have to come in and take care of ourselves so we can take care of whatever it is that's important to us in our lives.
Yeah. Even before I was a Feldenkrais practitioner, I was a teacher of movement. And, the temptation to show off is
Mhm.
just incredible. And the challenge of allowing people to find it in themselves. I once read a book called Teaching with Your Mouth Shut. And that's really what it should be, right? Is giving people the opportunity to learn without you telling them what to do.
Oh my gosh. I just have to tell you this one more story. When I changed how I was teaching swimming, I literally would go underwater so I couldn't talk.
Oh,
Like,
brilliant.
I'd go underwater so I could just observe them and observe their movements. And I had rules like come up and just say something like, what did you notice? How did that feel?
That's awareness through movement. That's beautiful.
Exactly. Yeah. And I literally had to get myself there, go underwater. Zip lady, you're not helping. They're figuring it out. We're creating safe spaces. They're figuring it out. It's not my job to overtalk. So,
Great.
yeah. Good. So good. Lavinia, thank you so much for being here. And of course, say the name of your website and any social media channels. We'll have it in the show notes as well. But sometimes it's nice for people to have that audio version of it in their head to pin that idea. Where can folks find you?
So my website is my name, laviniaplonka.com. And even if you don't find the website, if you just Google my name, I think I'm the only Lavinia Plonka in the world. So it was easy for me to grab that domain long ago. And once you get in there, you know, there's just tons and tons of resources, blog posts, articles, you know, so just have a ball.
Nice. Very good. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was great to meet you.
You too.